Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anna Diamantopoulou, the head of το Δίκτυο. It's a leading Athens-based think tank, which is programming partner of Delphi Forum. We welcome you here today, καλώς ορίσατε, at a special and important discussion which hails from the past, concerns the present, and prepares us for the future. There will be a shift in the global age of population from 7% to 20% during the next few decades. This growth will be one of the greatest social, economic, and political transformations of our time. Hence, it's imperative to discuss the strategy and policies which Western governments should implement so as to tackle new demographic challenges. Hence, labor market, social security, and lifelong learning policies, as well as healthcare and welfare systems, have to adapt to new realities ahead. Digital era, development in home healthcare services, and new labor models are changing things for the better. Age racism, be it towards young or older people, triggers conflicts and injustices. And it certainly does not help states to channel efficiently their productive forces. Sorry. That's something particularly clear in Greece, which has not yet designed any concrete strategy on protection and particularly on participation of this age group in social and economic life. Dictio has put priority on all these things we are discussing today. We published the first report on silver economy in Greece 4 years ago. We also published a big report titled The Treasure of 60 Plus last year. And now we are hosting this discussion. The title is Societal Contract for Aging Societies in Post-Pandemic Era, which will hopefully result in another innovative report featuring insights by our distinct invitees. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Maria Karagiannidou. Maria is a main member of our core team in Dictio. She's going to introduce the speakers and coordinates the discussion. And Maria, of course, is an expert in this field as well. So have an interesting discussion with us.
Thank you, Anna. An expert is a very it's a very important word. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm working on aging the last years. So I would like to thank you and welcome you in today's discussion about the new societal contract for the aging societies in the post-pandemic period. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the older generations, and the risk of violation of human rights shed a light at the special needs of older persons. And we are here today in order to discuss some of these challenges, but as well some opportunities. So for that reason, for that purpose, I would like to invite Professor Grabowski to start the discussion by focusing on redesigning older societies.
Great. Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with everyone today. So COVID has absolutely devastated long-term care facilities around the globe. And I think it's really provided a window into how we could potentially begin to change not only long-term care facilities, but also the entire system for older adults and their caregivers. The US was not any different than the countries where all of you live and work, including Greece, where we had a high number of fatalities and a high number of cases among both residents of long-term care settings, but also their caregivers. And individuals in these care settings were incredibly isolated, lonely, and really their caregivers weren't supported. We did work here suggesting nursing home caregiver was the most dangerous job in America during the pandemic. One of my colleagues called the pandemic a crisis on top of a crisis. And I really like that because we had a crisis in aging long before the pandemic. And I think that's really what this pandemic did. It laid bare a lot of the issues that we haven't addressed for many decades. And now we have this opportunity. Let's not let a pandemic go to waste here. Let's really begin to focus on how we can fix this. So what is the longstanding crisis? We know the short-term crisis is COVID. The longstanding crisis, whether it's here in the US, Greece, or other countries, it's that long-term care is underfunded. We don't put enough resources into the care of older adults. Regulations that govern their care are often ineffective and not enforced. Care is far too institutional. Most of the settings are these large buildings, 2 individuals to a room. We know that many of the long-term care facilities are understaffed. They don't feel like somebody's home. They actually feel very much like an institution. And we underinvest in care in the home and the community, which is where individuals in Greece, the US, and countries all around the globe, that's where people want care. Older adults want care in their homes. They don't want to go to a long-term care facility. So how do we fix this? I would say there's lots of things that need to be done, but I would point towards 2 big issues. First, we need to transform long-term care facilities. And second, we need to invest heavily in home and community-based services. So towards that first part of this, as I said earlier, long-term care facilities in the US and in many other countries around the world are these big institutional settings. The average size of a nursing home here in the US is 100 beds. Oftentimes 2 to a room, those long hallways. It's not at all a high quality of life for the residents. They aren't nice places to work. However, we have seen models that have come online here in the US that are smaller home models, where it's 8 to 12 older adults living in a home. And these homes are well staffed. The individuals caring for them are valued, and the residents are directing their own care. So both from a perspective of the resident and the staff that are caring for them, it's a much better model. And we did a study of one of these models called the greenhouse, and we found much better quality of care and quality of life. Now, it won't surprise any of you that these models are much more expensive and they're going to take dollars. And so policymakers, whether it's here in the US or Greece, are going to have to pay more, invest more to actually build these models. So that's the first part. There's always going to be a group that's going to need nursing home services. Let's make those nursing home services, those long-term care facility services, as strong as possible. And that's a small home model that's well staffed and very home-like. On the other side, Greece, the US, lots of countries have underinvested in home and community-based services. I said this earlier, but I'll say it again because it's such an important point. Individuals want services in their own home. They don't want to move. They want to age in place, but they want to age in the right place. And the right place is a home where they're supported. And that support comes from long-term care services. And there are countries where this is the expectation. I think about the Netherlands, for example, where when older adults have long-term care needs, those are provided by the state. They're provided in the home. Here in the U.S., it largely falls on families, and once you qualify for income and asset thresholds for Medicaid, then services potentially come in. But we have a lot of individuals. We have this forgotten middle income group here in the U.S. They're not wealthy enough to self-finance their own home and community-based care, and they're too wealthy to qualify for Medicaid. We need to get more services to them. And I'll say President Biden has made steps here and put a lot of dollars most recently into investing in the home and the community. My final point I want to stress here, oftentimes these are held up as counter ideas that we can either invest in long-term care facilities, or we can invest in the home. I think this is a false dichotomy. We need to do both. And we need to invest heavily in nursing homes. We need to transform them, reimagine nursing homes towards something that really approximates a small home-like model. But we also need to put additional dollars into home and community-based care. This is how we're going to meet the needs of older adults. It's not one or the other, it's both, and it's investing in both heavily. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with everyone today, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Professor Gabriel, thank you so much. I will keep three things. The first is that it's indeed a crisis on top of a crisis. This is very, very accurate. And the other is that we still have the funding issue, the regulation issues, and invest in community care. These were our issues. These are continuing to be our issues. But I will keep, of course, that we have now the opportunity to change all the services and make that better. And the other thing that I'm going to keep for the end is that the forgotten middle income population. I think this is everywhere. Thank you for that. Elena Gliskaya from the World Bank, she will share with us her experience of trying to mapping part of the services for older people in Greece. Elena.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Elena Glinskaya, and I'm a lead economist in the Social Protection and Jobs Global Practice at the World Bank. I'm leading a project on aged care requested by the Greek Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs and implemented by the EU and the World Bank. The project focused on gaining a deep understanding of the current needs for aged care and patterns of provision and utilization of aged care services. The project started before COVID-19, and I had a chance to visit Athens in February 2020 to meet the counterparts and also to visit the sites where the government services are provided. Now we all see the impact that COVID-19 had and still having on the older people, and we understand even more than before the importance of increasing the availability of affordable and quality aged care. In addition to the government commitment to the cause, Greece is very fortunate to have a thriving community of NGOs and also a very strong academic community. And the issues of aged care services have been in the focus of their research for quite some time. So for this project, we are building on some of the very important work that already had been done by many of them. I, in particular, want to highlight the work done on the basis of the data from the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe. We call it SHARE, it's abbreviation, SHARE survey. So this SHARE survey is the largest pan-European social science panel study, and it's provide internationally comparable longitudinal data with insight into health and socioeconomic living conditions of the European individuals. What is very important for us is that SHARE allows to study the needs for care, as it provides information on the prevalence of limitations of activity of daily living, we call them ADLs, and instrumental activities of daily living, AIDLs. And SHARE also allows to study access to the different modalities of home-based care. So let me share with you some of the highlights from the prior analysis. So prior to COVID, on the basis of SHARE, we observed that roughly 10% of Greek seniors reported that they need help with activities of daily living, and about a quarter of those 80 and years older did so. So 10% and a quarter. A significantly higher proportion of seniors, about a quarter of those 65 to 80 and a half of those 80 plus, report that they need help with the instrumental activity living, daily living. We also see that women and low-income individuals tend to have higher needs. And compared internationally, we see that the prevalence of ADLs is on the low side in Greece, compared with other European countries, and the prevalence of IADLs on the higher side.
Prior to COVID, there was no evidence that the proportion of seniors with needs increased over time, but of course we need to revisit the statistics post-COVID. So the analysis of post-COVID data would be very important. Again, prior to COVID, we observed the following patterns of home utilization among seniors with needs. So roughly 1/5 in Greece of seniors in Greece did not receive any care. I'm sorry, the seniors with needs, the seniors with ADL limitations, did not receive any care. Roughly 2/5 received only informal familial care. Roughly 30% received care from combined professional and familial sources, and less than 10% relied on professional care only. Over time, we saw a strong decline in the share of seniors who did not receive any care, which is very good news. And that decline was matched by a substantial increase in the share of those who received both professional and familial care. We see that this increase is driven practically all by the increase in the utilization of formal self-paid care, and is driven by the middle and high income individuals. So it's the high income and middle income individuals who go in the market and purchase formal care from the private sector, NGO and private sector. There is actually lots more we can learn from SHARE, but let me talk now about the mapping exercise and data collection that we are undertaking with the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs and the local NGO partner. We may not have all the answers in the course of the project implementation, but we are definitely hoping to add to the body of knowledge and shed light on the most important aspects of both demand and supply provision of care in Greece. So the mapping exercise wants to understand in detail the de jure and de facto situation with regard to 3 publicly funded programs: Centers of the Open Protection of the Elderly, CAPI, daycare centers for the elderly, KIFIs, and help at home. So for this, we developed a set of questionnaires to collect primary data, and there are 7 sets of questionnaires to be administered to different stakeholders. So there are questionnaires for national officials, municipal officials, mayors, municipal officials, managers of these programs, service providers, frontline staff, service users and family carers of service users, and non-service users. I want to highlight that we are going to survey the family carers and the non-service users because we want to know their perspective on the program and broad accessibility of services. So these questionnaires will be used to conduct structural interviews in 2 municipalities. And the questionnaires will cover several domains. Let me just describe these domains very, very briefly. The first domain is on institutional framework, what institutions involved in provision of long-term care, the division of tasks, role and responsibilities across thresholds at the municipal, local, and so on and so forth, and related. So the second domain is about policy development and funding. And remember, we're always aiming to collect de facto and de jure information, and we want perspective from different set of stakeholders. The third domain would be about the issues of eligibility determination and the questions about, what are the rules for accessing the 3 programs: application process, outreach. And what we want to do here, we want to build a profile of beneficiaries and understand the details of services, especially services provided by the Help at Home program, which is most important in this context of individuals with needs. The fourth domain covers various questions on administrative processes, and we want to know the extent to which they are automized or could be automized. The fifth domain is about the characteristics of providers, and here we want to know information about the frontline carers, right? Job descriptions, actual task profiles, protocols for service provision, and the related. The sixth domain about quality assurance, and the seventh and last domain about the integration with the related services. I want to highlight that the questions in these domains would be asked across all these questionnaires. So we can triangulate data after we have them. For example, the question about the rules for eligibility will be asked multiple stakeholders, right? And we will be able to compare de facto with the de jure. At least this is the plan. Also, in analyzing this data, we will be able to compare the findings with what we know about service provision in other countries. And that's, again, very important to have the benchmarking in this area of services. We're in the middle of the project implementation, so unfortunately, I do not have any results to share. But I hope I got you interested, and please stay tuned, and we'll hopefully have some interesting results to share soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. This is a very important work for Greece, because we never had this kind of information and analysis for the services, for the people, for carers. So I think it will be extremely valuable, even for the aging strategy that the Greek government is doing at the moment. Thank you for that. Raphael Vindenberg from the Care Policy and Evaluation Center of the London School of Economics will speak about the need of projecting the future needs of long-term care for older people.
Thank you very much, Maria, for that introduction. I'm Raphael Wittenberg from the London School of Economics. Anna mentioned in her introduction look to the future, and indeed projections of need for long-term care for older people into the future is very much with an eye to building strategies for the future. It's a big issue. About 17.5% of older people in England have ADL limitations, so seemingly even higher than in Greece. A lot of people are very much benefiting from support with long-term care, or at least need support for long-term care. So the issue of funding long-term care has been a subject of debate and indeed concern in many countries and over many years, for the reasons that David mentioned in his comments a bit earlier. The rising number of older people, potentially also rising expectations of the care, quality of care that people may expect. And because it's a very labor-intensive sector, almost by definition, its costs do seem likely to rise considerably, with limited scope for replacing people with capital, the traditional way of increasing productivity. So a lot of concern about its future affordability, and much debate and reforms in various countries in Europe and elsewhere. For example, in Germany's had a series of reforms. Greece now has its aging strategy. Scotland has had reforms, but in England there has been 25 years of debate. Everyone agrees there needs to be reforms, and there's a lack of agreement about what those reforms should be. So why do we produce projections of long-term care needs in this particular context? And I'm going to suggest three reasons. And we have been using our projections that my colleagues and I have been producing for England for all three of these purposes. First of all, to inform financial and service planning by central and local government. In the UK, we've known this as spending reviews, where government publishes plans for public expenditure looking ahead 3 years at a time. And indeed, they use our projections for that purpose. Secondly, I've already mentioned proposals to reform long-term care. There have been so many of them in England over the last 25 years, and many of them, I think all of those by government and major political parties, have been informed by detailed projections. And thirdly, to look at the long-term fiscal sustainability of public expenditures. The EU Aging Working Group, as you know, produces such projections every couple of years for each EU country. And within the UK, we have an Office of Budget Responsibility that does so. And again, our work has very much fed into those analyses. So various important reasons why we produce projections and how they are used by government agencies. But in looking at these projections and using them to inform policy, it's extremely important to understand their basis, their value, but also their limitations. Most of the projections of which I'm aware, and certainly the ones we produce, are projections of the demand side, of need and demand. But they're not projections of supply, but we do very much need to consider supply both of unpaid care, which is the great majority of care by family and friends, and also supply of paid care. The workforce is another big issue. I'll come back to those. And we need to recognize that projections are not forecasts. They're based on very specific assumptions about what the trends in the factors that influence demand for care, why care is likely to be needed. And we need to be very clear about what we're assuming about future government policies and future public expectations, for example, about the quality of care. In order to produce these projections, we have to think about what are the main factors that are likely to influence the need for long-term care for older people over the coming years and beyond, and what is likely to affect the expenditure. And I'm going to suggest 4 major issues, although there are others. First of all, of course, the numbers of older people, which is affected mainly by future mortality rates. And of course, the improvement in mortality rates in old age has been a huge achievement. It has, of course, slowed down in the most recent period. And the pandemic is estimated to have reduced life expectancy by about a year. There's then disability rates in later age, and I will come on to those in a moment. There's the availability of unpaid care, and closely related to that, household composition, whether people are living alone or with extended family. Again, I'll come back to that. And there's also the issue of the wages of care staff, which link up with wider government policies, for example, on minimum wages and on immigration to increase the available workforce. So there are a lot of issues to consider. It's a complex picture. Trends in disability have certainly been studied in terms of how they have varied, for example, between countries. And indeed, the trends do vary between countries. Indeed, to the extent that the disability rates have risen in some countries and fallen in others. Moreover, in some countries, such as England, there's different evidence from different surveys. So to use past trends to guide the future presents considerable problems. There's also different evidence depending on the severity of the condition looked at. For example, colleagues in Newcastle, Carol Jagger and colleagues, have projected that multimorbidity, 2 or more health conditions, is likely to rise quite considerably over the period to 2035. And the numbers with 4 or more health conditions will almost double. But at the same time, disability rates are not projected to rise, indeed potentially to fall, especially among men, although less so among women. And accordingly, independent life expectancy is expected to increase, principally for men and slightly for women. So what should one envisage in producing projections? What should one assume? A lot will depend on policies on the prevention of disability and how successful they are. Unfortunately, the evidence on measures that prevent disability successfully is rather limited. There's some evidence, for example, on preventing social isolation and loneliness, very much in the news now and relevant to disability in old age, but the evidence is mixed. There's evidence on falls prevention, but again, somewhat mixed. And evidence on reablement, which has attracted, certainly in the UK and beyond, a lot of policy interest in recent years, and some evidence that it can indeed be successful. A lot of long-term care needs relate to dementia, and it's been estimated, for example, by the Lancet Dementia Commission, that about a third of dementias could, in principle, be prevented by acting on the risk factors in middle age and into old age, such as smoking and lack of physical activity, diabetes and other health conditions, and again, social isolation and depression. And in a recent study, we've shown that there's evidence that smoking cessation, treating hypertension, and hearing aids are cost effective even in terms of dementia alone, before one adds on their impact in respect of cardiovascular conditions. I will turn now to unpaid care. It's very well known the vast majority of care for older people is provided by their families, and principally by their close family, spouses, partners, daughters and sons. And there's huge, therefore, need for the unpaid care to continue to be encouraged. Otherwise, the costs that would be transferred to public funds could indeed be very huge. And for this reason, governments have taken a close interest in supporting carers. But there's always the conflict between encouraging labour market participation and encouraging unpaid care to continue, and how to enable people, it's mainly women in this instance, how to enable them to combine the two if they're willing and able to do so. And of course, there are many issues that influence whether people are able to provide unpaid care, for example, for their parents, including their own health, where they live, whether they have competing responsibilities, for example, childcare, but also issues around their beliefs and views about the responsibility to provide care for their parents, and the availability, indeed, of alternative formal services. We are currently conducting a study on attitudes to providing care to one's parents if they need it in the future, and hope to be able to publish findings on this later in the year. The need for care will rise clearly. Whether the supply of unpaid care can keep pace with the rising need seems uncertain, but it may well be that if people have parents needing help, they will provide that help, even if that means there's going to be more unpaid care per person in the future. So these are some of the issues we've needed to consider in producing projections. So in conclusion, I take the view that projections of demand for long-term care are valuable and important for informing government reforms and government planning, that the basis of these projections need to be clearly understood by those using them, that it's complex to produce these projections because there's so many different factors impacting on need and demand for long-term care, and uncertainty about many of them. The uncertainty, I think, is considerable. The Royal Commission in the UK referred to a funnel of doubt, but nevertheless, with an eye to the future, I think we should be continuing to produce these projections, and I would recommend that policymakers take them into account. Many thanks.
Thank you, Rafael. As we are discussing how we'll transform after the pandemic the societies in order to have better services for older people, I think that, as you said, future affordability is crucial for any kind of transformation, any kind of planning for them, these new older societies. Thank you, Rafael. Then I'm going to invite Paul Keidner Paul is advisor at the Greek Foundation TIMA, and they are doing a lot of work for older people in Greece. Paul?
Thank you very much, Maria. I'm honored to be part of such a distinguished panel, and I'd like to thank you for the kind invitation. So perhaps, as you say, I can offer a perspective of our work supporting NGOs working in the field of the elderly in Greece. And I'd like to begin by providing an overview of the situation in the country in order to provide a backdrop and the reasons a foundation is so wholly committed to this sector of the elderly in the country. Greece has the highest share of population aged over 65 among all EU member states, and conversely, the lowest share of spending on long-term care as a percentage of overall health spending. Recent figures show that Greece allocated less than 0.2% of GDP to long-term care, which is far below the EU average of 1.5%, obviously leading, of course, to limitations in the services that are able to be provided. In 2020, for example, for every 100,000 inhabitants, there were fewer than 1 long-term care beds in nursing and residential care facilities, ranking Greece the lowest among EU member states. This partly explains why family and close relatives have taken on the very large burden of elderly care and why NGOs form such a vital contribution to the care of the elderly in the country. Also, the fact that there is no central government service for long-term care creates further challenges in terms of representation and the coordination of issues related to the elderly at the state level. So this provides a backdrop to the issues, and if we delve into the numbers a little further, the problem facing the elderly in Greece becomes even more acute. Currently, more than 500,000 elderly report that they have difficulty with personal care, with almost 2/3 requiring personal assistance. That's according to OECD figures in 2020. Further, 22%, so that's almost 1/4 of the population, is aged 65 plus, and that's rising, as we all know. 21% of people aged 65 and over are at risk of poverty. Of the 2,482,000 pensioners in Greece, 77% of those 65 and above receive a median pension of 643 euro. 69% of people 65 plus suffer from chronic illnesses. 62% of people 65 plus have some form of disability, and 129,000 people have been diagnosed with dementia. That was according to Elstat in 2020. So the need for support in the sector is clear. As Mrs. Glinskaya said, about 1/5 to 2/5 of those who needed care did not receive it. And this is exactly where Tima Charitable Foundation comes in. So Tima was established as early as 2011 in memory of John M. Karas and his wife Athina Karas, and personal experience brought the difficulties that can stem from aging and elderly care to the fore, and sensitize the family to these issues, especially for those less privileged and vulnerable. As such, the foundation was established with a mission to support the development of the thriving, as Ms. Glinskaya said, Greek non-profit organizations dedicated to social improvement in the fields of aging in Greece. The foundation mainly awards grants in the areas of social welfare and healthcare, and of course, overwhelmingly for disadvantaged sectors of society. There are 4 areas of focus that Tima focuses on. They're wide-ranging, but span across aging and disability, aging and health, care home support, care at home programs. These are the principal areas the foundation's grant making, especially in the past few years. So we'll take a look at these very quickly, and then I'll close. Aging and disability, older people obviously experience disability in different ways. Some have pre-existing disability, whilst others may have acquired a disability as a result of the aging process or disease, such as blindness with diabetes. The elderly that have disabilities are more vulnerable than the general aging population, especially during economic crises and health crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic. So increased vulnerability has led older disabled people to rely heavily on others to provide appropriate support. Many are also inadvertently excluded from health services due to limited funding and restrictive program requirements. So in the current environment, it is increasingly challenging to find either family or professionally trained caregivers to support older adults with disabilities. Through its grants, therefore, the Tima Charitable Foundation has funded and continues to fund initiatives that fulfill the needs of older disabled individuals and that build a culture of inclusion whereby quality of care and quality of life can ultimately be improved. In the field of aging and health, as we know, as people age, they require more support with respect to their health and become more at risk of developing age-related degenerative and chronic diseases. Presently, most people can expect to live well into their 70s and beyond. Recent data, moreover, indicates that Greece holds one of the highest aging rates in Europe. The percentage of the elderly population in Greece has increased significantly in the last decade and is higher than the EU average, as we said, with 1 in 4 Greeks over 65 years old, and this is increasing. A person's longer life expectancy, and more specifically the person's quality of health, has a fundamental effect on his or her contribution to society. And according to the World Health Organization, while it is often assumed that increasing longevity is complemented by a prolonged period of good health, this is unfortunately not always the case. Hence, if effort is made to improve the general health of the older population, their quality of life improves and local community participation rises. And this is where Tima comes in again. Care at home support. In the last decade, a financial crisis, a pandemic, as well as new legal requirements has led many care homes in Greece to experience a fiscal squeeze. As a result, this has forced them to minimize or even cease crucial investments, namely in infrastructure, equipment, and expansion of their programs. The majority of care homes are also unable to offer a holistic approach to the care of the elderly residents through the provision of services such as psychological support and recreational activities. This lack of stimuli drives many elderly people towards depression, which in turn are associated with severe physical and mental health issues. The strategy behind the support for care homes, therefore, is to support basic needs with grants that include, for example, anything from the provision of food to medical supplies, but also capacity building programs for the care homes themselves, as well as recreational activities to help support these institutions be more like a home, as Mr. Grabowski alluded to earlier. Last but not least are the care at home programs, and with this I'll finish, Maria. As Professor Grabowski noted in his introduction, in recent years the demand for care at home programs has increased, and this is especially true for people with dementia. Not just because the number of individuals with dementia has risen, that's a worldwide phenomenon, but because research has shown that a person-centered care approach eases dementia-related mental and behavioral symptoms. At the same time, care at home programs aim to ease the load of the individual's primary caregiver while giving them useful knowledge and tools that make caring for the person with dementia more manageable. So each care at home program that Tima supports is unique, but all are composed of health professionals who visit the care recipient at home on a regular basis, offering, for example, nursing, physical therapy, psychological and psychiatric support, as well as cognitive training through mental strengthening exercises. All have as their goal to train the caregiver as well, and as much as possible in order to be able to deal with the various stages of dementia as the disease takes its course and after the program has finished its course with the individuals. In Greece, as we said, about 130,000 individuals are diagnosed with dementia, and research points to the fact that many thousands more are undiagnosed. So the above are the four main pillars of Tima's grant making, covering some of the most pressing long-term needs of the elderly in Greece. However, the Foundation is quick to adapt to changing environments where necessary, as was the case with the COVID Emergency Fund. And Tima will continue to serve its mission by supporting as many of the critical and non-critical needs of the elderly in Greece, with a focus on enriching the lives and welfare of those most vulnerable in our society. Tima, by its nature, is a reactive organization. We can only do so much. We don't build strategy for long-term care, but it is clear for all those in the field that we do require a new societal contract for our aging population in Greece.
Thank you, Paul. That was very, very important. And as you mentioned, for Greece, it was a crisis on top of a crisis on top of another crisis. It was the crisis of long-term care, then the economic crisis, and then the health crisis. So I think that this is the right moment for us to, for Greece, I mean, to think and to structure a long-term care policy and system. And part of this will be, we hope that we will do through the national aging strategy that the University of Piraeus is doing at the moment in collaboration with LSE. Professor Nectarios from the University of Piraeus will talk a little bit more about this ongoing strategy.
Thank you, Maria. Also, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me in this very high-quality panel in order to discuss such an important issue as the demographics and the impact on the economy and the social systems. An opportunity in order to present you the main parts of our research with the goal of forming a national strategy concerning the demographic problem in Greece. As you probably know, the demographic problem in Greece is probably the most serious in the European Union. And this problem is on top of the economic problem that the country faces, generally speaking, but we had a major economic destruction during the last 12 years. And on top of that, we have the current problem of the coronavirus pandemic. So the background is very difficult for our country in order to overcome these problems and establish a feasible pattern for economic development in the future decade. The time frame for our research is the next 50 years. And the major parts of this research I have started since the beginning of this year are as follows. And I would like to take this opportunity to ask for your comments or suggestions in order to improve this planning process. The first part of the research is based, of course, on extensive demographic studies concerning all groups, but most basically the labor force group to the future decades. And we are going to use this information in order to make some projections and establish the prerequisites for the economic development in this difficult period for Greece. As you know very well, there are two major factors that they determine the long-term growth rates for any country, and these are the growth rate of the labor force and the growth rate of productivity. We do not expect any contribution, any positive contribution in the coming decades from the labor force part, and therefore we have to rely on the enhancement of the productivity factor. This is, of course, very difficult to develop and overcome the mean values for the, let's say, 10 to 20 years in the past. That is the current trend is below 1% as far as growth productivity is concerned in this country for the past 20 years. Therefore, we have to do a lot in order to improve that productivity growth rate. The main issue here is the restructuring of the educational system. We have postponed and we have failed to implement a major reform in this area. And we have an even bigger problem in the area of professional education. So we have to do both of those reforms in a very short period of time in order to improve the productivity rate, which is going to be the major determinant of the growth rate in the past. The fortunate thing is that the European Union has made eventually a decision, a major historic decision, to establish the Restructuring Funds. And this is what I consider as the first step towards some type of forming a federal Europe in the future. Anyhow, by means of this fund, Greece will get something close to 35 billion euros in the next 5 years. And if we leverage that with private financing, we might reach something close to 60 or 70 billion, which is not going to solve all our problems, but it's going to provide the major means in order to reinvest the Greek economy. We should note here that during the last decade, there was total disinvestment in the Greek economy to the volume of 100 billion euros. So we need to replace this capital, and if we do so, then we will attain growth rates close to 3.5 or 4% per year for the first decade up to 2030. And if we do that, then we will recover most of the damage that we have suffered in the past 12 years. This is the major part that we devote most of our research in the first part of this project. A separate chapter in this area will be to make some proposals concerning the defense strategy, given the demographic problem that we face. Here there are two things that we are going to emphasize. The first is to align with France in order to contribute toward the formation of a defense strategy in a common defense strategy in the European Union. And the second part is to align with countries like Israel in order to take weapons, because the defense of the country will not be able to depend on numbers anymore, and it does not make any sense, but only on high-tech technology concerning defense systems. The third part of the study will be the mapping of the facilities that are related to the aging problem. Elena from the World Bank already mentioned that a similar project is going on, and spoken with Elena, and we will be in touch in the near future also in order to coordinate our efforts. We have done a lot of progress in this area, and hopefully we'll be able to provide a full map of the existing facilities, and more important is to design the future map of facilities for the aging populations in the coming decades. The third part is what we would call the quality of life for the aging population. Here we cooperate collaborate with LSE in this area, and they have contributed a lot in this research project. And the most important part of this research is to emphasize the prevention and the active aging as policies, and coordinating policies, of course, in order to improve the quality of life of the aging population that is going to develop in the coming decades. What do we mean here? And the LSE has done considerable research in the past that's going to help us in this area, is what happens with chronic diseases, which absorb most of the health expenditures in any country. What is important here is to find ways to prevent this phenomena, basically by reducing both the frequency and the impact of chronic diseases. And the implication is that if we are successful in doing that, then we will lower the trend of healthcare expenditures in the future. This is a very provocative goal, and hopefully we will be able to come up with some new policies in this area. And the final part of this study is the demographic problem and its relation to the pension system, health system, and generally speaking, with the financing of the provision of services to the aged population. As far as the pension system is concerned, at the University of Piraeus, we have completed a major study that would solve the very serious problem that we have in this area. As you are probably familiar, we have probably the biggest implicit debt, pension debt, in all OECD countries. And this is a major problem because in addition to that implicit debt, we have also the higher public debt in OECD countries. So,
Professor Nectaris, Professor Nectaris, sorry to interrupt you, but we have to close. So,
okay. So I'm saying that both in the pension area and in the health system area, we have to come up with policies that will make the system sustainable and able to provide the promised services to an aged population. Thank you, and I'm relying on your comments.
Thank you. It's very important for Greece to have a national strategy, and this will be the first time that we have a national strategy. So I think it's crucial in order to for policy people to do the reformation that is needed. Overall, it seems that in order to transform our societies to be more age-friendly and to be able to care for older people, we need, first of all, to transform the challenges to opportunities. I think this is very important. So caring the community is, I think, very important. Funding as well are the two major issues. But I would like your thoughts on that. Unfortunately, we have only 7 minutes left. So I would like your thoughts on that, on care community funding, on how we will resolve this issue, and what is the most important. I think that although each country has to fight and balance between home community care and residential care, each country has to focus more on community care the next 20 years. Professor Gabrowski, I cannot hear you, so maybe you have to open your microphone. Or... I cannot hear you, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes.
Oh, great. I was going to say that if you look at the data, there's some countries that are doing very well. I mentioned the Netherlands earlier. Some of the Northern European countries look quite good on this issue. Unfortunately, the U.S. and it sounds like Greece are much further along the continuum. We have a lot of work to do in terms of rebalancing, if you will, our long-term care spending. Here in the U.S., it's even further magnified that we have most of the home and community-based care spending is done at the state level. And so we have some states in the U.S. that have done a really good job in sort of rebalancing and transforming the system. Other states look far too institutional. And so it really speaks to the need to nationalize this and think about whether there's a more universal long-term care benefit. And indeed, it's countries with a long-term care benefit like those Northern European countries that have really been able to do this well. Because I think relying on kind of individual states, whether it's here in the United States or up in Canada or other countries, it doesn't end up working.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. And of course, the role of NGOs are vital in every step for every country.
I was going to say that we do have a very sort of vibrant, as Elena said before, thriving NGOs in Greece, and they provide a lot of the elderly services that are required at the moment, filling the gaps where the state is not currently providing that kind of support. But we have to figure out how to contract these NGOs in order to be able to provide those services on a long-term basis and not just short-term funding through foundations like our own. We have a limit to the amount of funding that we can provide, and these really require long-term solutions rather than short-term fixes, which is essentially what we're able to provide.
Okay, I would like to, of course, unfortunately, we don't have any more time. I would like to thank you all for this session. That was very, very important and very informative. Thank you for being here and discussing all these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Greetings to everybody.